Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, what has the pandemic meant to people who are in recovery? We'll talk to a leading national expert next.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, as most people know, the pandemic has been hard on all of us, but for people who are trying to find sobriety and are in recovery, it is a double whammy. Not only are you isolated, but often you're being tempted back to that substance because of anxiety, especially if you're using drugs or alcohol to medicate. To talk about that today, Eric Niedermayer. He is with the Recovery Resources Council. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hits, take me back to March, you probably said to yourself, oh my goodness, how are we supposed to do this? Because so much of recovery is finding community and people to hold you accountable. So what was that like for you?
Well, for us at the council, we quickly moved to virtual sessions. Literally the very same week that the schools were closing in the North Texas area, we were starting to do virtual therapy sessions. Luckily, we had already had the technology set up for that ahead of time, and our staff had been trained in how to do that, and we were doing that in a very sparingly way for people who would struggle maybe to get to a session because of health issues or something. But literally that week, we moved everything to virtual. In the first week, we actually were doing it from the office. The second week, we actually had the staff in their own homes doing the virtual sessions. And we're still doing that today.
And how's it working?
It's working really well. Obviously, we didn't know it would work well when we first started doing it. But today, like on our mental health side, working with veterans and their spouses, we're doing 125 therapy sessions every single week.
Wow.
So a lot of therapy happening with this veteran, their spouse, and their children. On the substance abuse side, we've actually seen a growth in the attendance of group sessions for people having substance abuse issues. Almost a doubling in the size of attendance where pre-pandemic showing up in person versus now virtual.
Sure. And many people don't realize that you guys are a big organization. You serve 20 counties in North Texas?
We serve 20 counties, really all the way up to Wichita Falls. We we serve up there. We serve veterans with housing programs up in Wichita Falls and Denton, a lot of the surrounding North Texas counties. But the virtual piece, of course, makes it so that anybody can actually come to sessions with us.
Sure. Tell us the history. You guys have been around for a while.
Been around since 1946, so this is our 75th anniversary year. We were started by individuals in the recovery and business community to some extent. In 46, a lot of veterans were coming back from the war, and a lot of them had drug and alcohol issues from the war, just like you see today with people of Afghanistan coming back, veterans and things like that. And so people started coming together and creating councils, which is what we are, all across the country. AA was actually very new in 1946, maybe less than a decade old at the time, but it was starting to spread across the country. A lady named Marty Mann was one of the individuals who got her recovery, was actually the first woman to supposedly get a recovery from AA. And she started at the National Council, and from that affiliate started forming. And so we were one of those affiliates that were formed back in the 40s.
And you're the people that the media runs to when they need a quote. We're going to show an article on KERA's website talking about how you guys have adapted to the pandemic. What we haven't talked about is all of the new people who are probably headed your way. I know I see the alcohol sales have gone up. There's a lot of depression and people are self-medicating. Speak to that.
Well, we definitely have seen an increase showing up at our door. Our office oftentimes gets over 500 calls a week coming into our office, so it's a very busy office taking lots of calls. We get calls from the individual who wants the help, but we also get calls from family members. You know, a lot of times a family member, if they realize that their spouse or child or someone like that they care for is struggling, they don't really know what to do. And our agency is really one of those places you want to call because we can help ferret out what options you have. You know, if you have insurance, where you can go for that. If you don't have insurance, we can help you find some free services because there still are places for you to be able to get services, both inpatient and outpatient type services.
Sure. You mentioned working with veterans with PTSD and people with trauma. Tell us why that's so important to recovery.
Well, over time, recovery as it relates to drug and alcohol abuse has changed. It used to be very singular. If you think about the original name we had was the Council on Alcoholism, and then later expanded to Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. Well, as things have evolved, people have started to understand there's a definite correlation between drug and alcohol abuse and trauma and mental health issues. A lot of times people are self-medicating. And, you talk about what COVID has done to people. Well, it's isolated them in huge kinds of ways. The things they used to do self-care, they can't even do that. They can't be with their friends. They can't be with family members. And a lot of people have just started self-medication with drugs and alcohol. So it's caused a lot of problems. And so a lot of times families are kind of stuck together trying to deal with those problems alone. And they need to reach out to a place like us to be able to help figure out what steps they should take to be able to help themselves, if it's the person with the drug or alcohol issue, or the family, because it's not like someone has a drug and alcohol problem and it's only with them. It's a whole family issue.
Right.
Or it even can spread past the family to their employers, to their friends, all those things. Everybody gets drawn into the struggle this person's having. And so calling someplace like us, we can help you either by giving you the resources you need or helping refer you to the right place for you to go.
And getting to the root of the problem, because I think I compare it to, I had a car one time and it was way out of alignment and I kept getting flats and blowouts on the same tire. But dumb me, I didn't go get the alignment checked. Some people need to find out why is it that they keep running off the road.
Right, and that's part of the reason we focus more and more on trauma in the last 5 or 6 years, because there seems to be a really strong relationship between trauma and the abuse of drugs and alcohol abuse. We actually have a grant from the federal government right now where we're working with parents who've lost their children to CPS because of drug or alcohol abuse. And there's a long history oftentimes where these parents themselves were part of the CPS system when they were growing up. So there's a repetition that's happening. And so we actually got some funding from the federal government not to only do the drug and alcohol abuse piece, but to give them a master's level therapist to work with them on the trauma that they had growing up as a child. And we believe by addressing the trauma and the substance abuse at the same time, we give that individual a much better chance to get their lives straight and maybe get their kids back.
Yes, and you have a big event coming up. Tell us more about that.
Well, it's the Jim Bradshaw Stars in Recovery event. And we have Ray Wiley Hubbard who will be there. It's going to be on April the 15th. It's going to be an odd-looking event because everything's odd. I mean, we usually have Stars in Recovery and have 700 to 1,000 people show up for that. This year, if I had 700 to 1,000 people show up, I would be a COVID spreader.
Sure.
And I'd have all kinds of news coverage about how crazy I was to do that. So this event's a much more narrow event, probably with about 160 people. But, the big focus for us is really raising money for the council. During this COVID time, our resources are being stretched, and it's impacting the level of giving coming to us because it's harder to connect with donors and everything else that's there, but we still need that money that comes from an event like this. This has been our big event for multiple years, and we really need to have those funds coming in.
And there's the increased demand and fewer donors, so it obviously hits hard. We've only got about a minute left. What would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I'd like to leave the audience with the idea that, we do a lot of things, and, I didn't even touch on a lot of those. We also are in schools doing prevention work. Kids are another group of individuals that have been severely impacted by COVID. Luckily, we're finally able to get into schools doing some face-to-face, but we're also doing virtual sessions with kids in schools today, too. We cannot minimize what the impact of this has been on kids. All of us have suffered some level of PTSD for this, no matter you recognize it or not. I don't think there's any human walking around in our country who has not been severely impacted by COVID. So recognizing the need to serve kids, to serve the adults, there's a whole spectrum of individuals out there that really need the kind of help that the council offers.
Wow. Well, Eric, you did a great job, and thank you so much for the service that you have to our community and making Texas just a better place to live.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for having me here today. I really appreciate that.
You bet. We're going to put the website up to end the segment. recoverycouncil.org is the website. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You bet. And that's it for now. We'll see you next time.